Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from today. It's great to be back this afternoon. A huge thanks to my colleague MK who delivered the session on ERGs. It was absolutely brilliant to hear the voices of ERGs and how they are affecting change within their organisation. Moving on. Today, I'm joined by Melanie Woolfenden, who shares with us her deeply personal journey of transition to become the woman she is today, living in a richer and more wholehearted life. It has been a journey pitted with barriers, stigma, and prejudice, which Melanie faces head on to challenge societal norms and a trans-exclusionary status quo. This is about Melanie standing her ground in her power as a woman today. Melanie is currently a senior Oracle technology consultant at InnoApps. She describes herself as a motivated, courageous, and independent woman with a trans history. So please, everyone, welcome Melanie to our virtual stage. Hi there, Melanie.
Hiya, thank you for that lovely introduction.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, thank you.
Good. Well, I'm really looking forward to spending the next 45 minutes us having a conversation about your journey, your trans history, and how you have challenged, gone against all the odds to being and living who you are today. So, Melanie, I mean, we've had a number of occasions about your story and your journey, and transitioning socially and seeking gender affirming care has been and is a deeply personal and multifaceted journey. Melanie, what has been your journey? What has your journey kind of looked like? And what were those most kind of pivotal or meaningful moments for you along the way?
Okay, let me give you a little bit of a backstory, tell you a little bit about me, and introduce myself for those people that don't know me. I've always been a very empathetic person. I'm normally sort of very tuned into a mood or a vibe, which has always given me a sort of an understanding of different behaviors and personality traits, and especially I focus in on things that I admire. I'm no personality expert or psychologist. I'm a 50-something adult woman. I'm a wife. I've got 3 super energetic dogs that might appear in the background, so I might start making noise, but hopefully they'll stay quiet. I try my best in business and in my local rural community, which I'm heavily involved. And basically, I suffer like many of us with just feeling like I'm just not doing enough. And by Monday morning, after a restful weekend or not restful weekend, I just have to do it all again. But people don't see me like that, and that always surprises me. And they don't often see the side of the fact that I worry deeply, that I overthink, and that I really don't believe in myself. And I guess, like many parts of my previous life, I've got really good at masking that. I grew up in a traditional working class family. Mum gave up accountancy, her career in accountancy, to start a family, and sort of did some labouring jobs just to kind of make ends meet. And the things that she sacrificed for the family never went unnoticed to me. Dad was very strict and formidable man. He worked as in a district manager for a brewery. He was 6'6" and built like the side of a house, would be how people described him. And he was very intimidating. But he was a devout Christian. He was a really hardworking man. He had really high moral values, and he kept his words. He was definitely a person of his man of his word, and he would always believe that actions spoke louder than words. And I guess that those fundamental values are of faith and work and resilience independence and self-motivation have definitely shaped who, the woman I am today. I grew up in rural England back in the 70s, and I didn't know anybody that was gay, never mind anyone who was going through the emotions and experiences that I was feeling. So just to kind of just make sure that the ground set here, every trans person's journey is unique. So I'm going to share a little bit about, sort of my journey and focus on, sort of post sort of transitional time, but just recognize that every story is unique. And there is a huge demand on medical services, particularly the NHS. I mean, I started 15 years ago and it was stretched then, and there's been more demand for the service. And even though it took me 6 or 7 years back then, it's going to take even longer these days. So, there is a real demand for this, and that weight and that impact can have significant impact. Not everybody seeks medical care and medical transition, because there are family histories, there are underlying conditions, there are other effects, that could happen in a person's life that could affect their reason why they might not medically transition, or even hold them back from socially transitioning. So just to be aware that every individual is different, and just be respectful and find out about them. I'll take you back to 2005 when I really started my social transition. I was working in IT. I'd spent a long time in the 90s when the good old internet was called the World Wide Web, and Google wasn't even a thing, believe it or not. How do we manage without Google? There was Yahoo and web crawlers, and I found out that out in the world that I wasn't alone. But it took until sort of knowing that for about 30 years, it took until 2005 till I took the brave step of taking that outside, and I went to an event in Manchester called Sparkle, and it's like a trans pride event, and I'd agreed to meet up with some people I'd chatted to online and attend this safe space. And what I got from the event wasn't really what I expected. It wasn't the event that was in itself was the thing that was a major thing. For me, it was going out in the city and doing everyday things as my true self, that suddenly I opened Pandora's box. Things where I had just been in a hotel room or at home, it suddenly just became real. I'd put up so many barriers. I was 6 foot tall. I was too ugly. I was this, I was that. It could never happen for me. I'd spent years putting up barriers of why it couldn't happen for me. And suddenly they came crashing down over a weekend. And the problem was I couldn't pack it all up back in a box again and just remember it like a family holiday. I'll jump 5 years forward. So it took me it still sat there on the fence for 5 years. And by this time I was regularly socially transitioned. I was going out with friends and work colleagues. I even went to a go live for a project in London with colleagues, as was my alter ego at the time, but as myself. But there was a fear of what transitioning full time would look like to my family, to my friends, and that held me back, and that had held me back for 5 years, and that was still holding me back. So we're 30 plus years of knowing what was going on inside wasn't quite right, but still being held back just because of that fear. Interestingly enough, one thing that I do stick out is a breaking confidentiality. I'd spoken to a GP about wanting to find out more about what this meant to me, and I'd recognized that this was significant in my life, and I wanted to get some actual care about it and take it further of what was involved in medically transitioning. And the GP was very good, and it was like, well, I don't know anything about this, I'll be honest with you. I'll just I'll go away and I'll do some research and I'll get back to you. Which was, great. That was everything that I needed to hear at the time. But what happened was he saw me in town on one weekend, and he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "Hey, if you just want to make an appointment at the surgery, we can chat about what you talked about." And that started a load of questions from my partner I was with at the time. It led to some coercive behavior, and it made just life just really bad for me. And just, I'm not going to go into great details, but just to say, something that was really simple, was offhand, but meant well, actually had a massive impact on my life for a further 2 years, actually. And on in the 2nd of July 2012 is my Melanie's birthday, and real birthday, and that's when I really started life, living in true colour. I came to work as Melanie, and I switched over my driving license, everything, and I started living as me. It did end my relationship at the time. Now, I could tell you that the life was filled with unicorns and rainbows and it was amazing, but that isn't the truth. No one's life is like that. Life is hard. It was tight. Money was tight. I was single. I was struggling to pay bills. Sort of when you're involved in a relationship, you make financial commitments together, and then when those relationships break up, you're found maybe just wanting a little bit. And I had more going out than I had coming in, and it was really, really difficult. I was fortunate and blessed that I had job security and the opportunity to do some overtime, which just basically helped me keep things afloat. And it took me a couple of years to kind of get back on track, and that was a really challenging time. But they say whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and that's so true. It was really a humbling time, but sometimes when you get back to the bare bones and get back to humility, one, you focus on what's important, and two, you really find out who your friends are. So I don't regret that time, that period of that time. It definitely, sort of made me focus on my faith, and it made me think about what was really important to me, and just recognize what parts of my life I really valued and what things I needed to let go of. So that's a quick one.
I mean, Melanie, thank you for sharing your very personal story. And I'm a strong believer that every one of us has a story, and every one of us has a unique story. But how you have used the intersection of your values, faith, work, resilience, how you grew up in that household, use those values to break down those barriers and create those personal steps that you needed, the steps that worked for you, to move forward, to live wholeheartedly. That is a true testament of being brave and being bold and living by your own values, right? So thank you for sharing that. And what I would like to do kind of next is perhaps go a little bit more fast forward into into your working world. And in one of our previous conversations, you once shared with me that your experience of living as a woman with a trans history opened up your world to how men and women are treated so differently.
Yes.
Can you share what that experience looked like for you during that transition period? What did you discover?
So I guess that navigating the world as a woman wasn't exactly what I expected. I think you have this idea of what life is like as for other people, and you can plan for it and you can think of, but until you actually, sort of walk in their shoes, you don't really understand what their life is like. And I found that my relationships, particularly with men and women, changed overnight. Men I'd expected would be hostile. I'd anticipated that they would be they would find difficulty, managing my changing life and wouldn't understand. And I expected women to be understanding and gracious and continue to build the bonds that they had before, because I'd had these relationships. I was socially transitioned for a long time. So, I thought I knew what was going to happen, but actually I found that the men in my life were often more gracious, and generally they didn't feel threatened by me. And that surprised me. There was definitely a shift, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the women were far more competitive than I'd ever noticed. They were so much more critical and harsh, and often hostile. And I just felt suddenly that I was being judged by everybody around me. To be honest, maybe some of it was in my head, but I became very sensitive to eye rolls, to looks of disdain, to underhanded comments, things like that. I felt like I was critiqued for what I wore, my posture, how I showed up, how I reacted, how I navigated between different conversations and situations. Feelings that these things I'd never ever had to consider before. Frequently got this feeling that I'd got to stay in my lane. I had to learn how to navigate communication when I was talking to people's husbands and partners, trying to be oversensitive about not overstepping the mark because I might be seen as like talking to them too much. I had to learn door etiquette, lift etiquette. Just the way I maneuvered around the world completely changed to be accepted. I felt like that I still didn't fit in. I was trying not to draw any unwanted attention to myself. So I was craving to try and fit in and to be like everybody else and not draw that attention. I became overly self-aware, and my confidence started to ebb to a completely new low. I was unlearning years and years and years of kind of traits and things I'd done. I'd been, living in a male body as a male for 40 years, and suddenly I had to relearn everything in a matter of weeks and months. So that was a challenging process. And I just felt like I was never enough, and I never could see an end to that. I just felt so inadequate.
I mean, there is I suppose a point here to be made, if I may, that women do need to lift other women, and together we can go on this journey with one another. And I think it's a beautiful journey that we can all go on. And so, irrespective of your gender, irrespective of your race, irrespective of your sexual orientation, how do we all go on this journey together with one another?
And it was a bittersweet. I mean, I was being accepted for being the woman I was, so it was a good thing, but it was also a real change and just a real. I guess I was like living in a parallel universe. I can try and describe it. I was the same person intellectually. However, how people perceive me suddenly changed overnight. How I would be questioned about the advice I gave in my role, from by other professionals. They would ask for a second opinion from a male colleague when previously I was the voice of authority. I would be spoken over in meetings. I would be undermined. I would be ignored. I work in IT, and I work in a male-dominated environment still. There's a lot more women in IT, which is fabulous. But, suddenly I became isolated from my teammates that I'd had for years. And it was a positive thing and a negative thing. They would all go off to lunch together and they would go and talk about football, and I felt left alone and left on the outside. But that did, sort of, it was challenging at the time, but it helped me build up sort of better relationships with my female peers. I was bypassed for opportunities where previously I was given projects and leadership roles. Suddenly they were bypassed. They chose other males in the team, and I was left behind. But I hadn't changed. My abilities hadn't changed. I seemed to have to work so much harder to get the same recognition or even less recognition. And I just felt like I was sidelined because, my face didn't fit. I was actually, I was supposed to go and present a solution to a customer, and I was told by a salesperson that I should stay at home and that I should coach a colleague who was less senior than me how to do the presentation. And they made an excuse that, oh, they were nearer to Manchester than I was, but they were quite happy to drag me to London 2 weeks before. So there was, even though they were trying to cover their tracks or whatever else, the messaging was really clear. And my life has never been a smooth road. And I had two choices. I could wallow and complain to anyone that would listen about the injustice of it all, or I could do something else. And me being me, I fought back. I fought back my anxiety, my overthinking, and my fears. I stood tall. I refocused, and I remembered what I was good at. I started working on building my reputation. I maintained my integrity. I respectfully challenged others, which helped me to build trusted relationships with my peers and my colleagues. And I just carried on growing my personal network by living true to my values. And my peers eventually started to respect me, and it broke down the barriers one by one.
I really like the piece around you stood tall. And Melanie, you are tall, a very tall person. I really love the piece around you standing tall despite the anxiety, despite the challenges, despite that being accepted, despite that feeling of belonging. So I suppose finding your community was pivotal to all of this, and belonging is vital to everyone. What was your experience of finding community, and how has this led to your purpose?
You're quite right, and being accepted looks different for everyone. And I guess one of the pivotal moments in work was actually colleagues inviting me out socially. Now, I knew in work that they had to accept me because I could just trot off to HR. But to actually invite me on nights out, to the pub, to for food and things like that, they didn't need to do that. That was real acceptance for me, that people felt like they were happy to be with me outside of work. And so that was from a working perspective. I started going to Zumba and fitness classes, and I found massive amounts of support and inspiration from the women in my fitness family. Exercise has been a significant part of helping me with my mental well-being. It's helped me build confidence, and especially in the area of feeling enough. So my fitness family was massive to me. I got involved in my local community charity. I wanted to try and give back. I also wasn't established in my community, so I started working with a local charity, and I'm now a treasurer and a trustee on the charity commission. And that's really helped sort of build me into my community and things, and just be accepted in my community. I was offered in my previous company the role of leading the LGBT community, and I didn't feel that I actually was very good in that kind of position. When I was offered the role, I'd never really been a part of the LGBT community, and so I didn't feel like I would be good enough, and it was quite a learning journey. But I leveraged my networking and I just talked about before, and my team building skills and my leadership skills, and the network grew, particularly in the allyship, by 5 times its original size during my time there. One of my things that I was really proud of was making a difference when people change their names. Now, and my wife now, she's sitting on the fence. Does she change her name in work? It's so difficult when you get married and if you want to change your name, because there's so many different systems, and where do you start with it? And then you're in this kind of fluid area. Trans people will find this particularly difficult, but so are people who are getting divorced and things like that. So what we did was we started looking at the different systems and just finding out who were system owners, and then looking at what the process was, documenting the process to change names on there, and then eventually we started using technology to be able to see if we could streamline some of those name change processes, and creating like a flow that some of it was still manual, some of it was technological, but we allowed us to make it far easier for people to change their name on all the systems without having to sort of this problem. And that was just a real practical thing. So that was something I was really proud of. And it just helped me develop my leadership skills. It helped, sort of empower me. It brought me back out of that kind of pit of not feeling enough. And just so that, yeah. So community is so powerful. It definitely does. And it was definitely rewarding voluntary work.
Yeah, community is absolutely pivotal to who we are and where we belong and where we're accepted, and whatever shape, form that community may look like. And you spoke about sport, and sport has this power of bringing people together in local communities and breaking down barriers. And actually later on this afternoon we do have a panel on sport and how women are affecting change in that sector. But I think there's something here around how do we now challenge organisations on rethinking, recreating their HR policies, where name changes for this community can become so much easier. Why should you have to battle through a name change? It should just be a simple process.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I mean that's just one thing, but I mean there is so much, like you say, it seems to be a small thing, and it is a small change, but it can have such a significant impact on someone.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it may be a small change for organisations, but for the individual that is actually having to go through that name change, it's a big moment, and it's a very important moment. And so we need to think about reframing, readdressing how these policies can be rewritten to make the process so much easier. Melanie, in your...
Let me share another thing that just comes to mind. And for people, we had someone that was, sort of fluid, a person that was fluid, and what they did was they put a double-sided name badge, so that they had their one picture on one side for when they presented female, and the other picture on the other side for when they were male. It was still the same unique ID card, so it still let them in all the doors and everything else, but their name was appropriate for how they presented that day, and their badge was appropriate for how they presented that day. Sorry, that was just something very simple, but really a nice way of just managing that. Sorry.
So I've just had a comment in by one of our participants, Azima Khalid, and she says that name change or even a title change, it is so difficult to do that even in the UK, let alone any part of the world.
Yeah, and it's hard anyway, but you kind of want it to be a little bit easier in work. I mean, there's so many things that your name is on, one of the hardest ones to change, which it would just surprise me completely, was PayPal. You can set up a PayPal account in a moment, but trying to change your name on PayPal, they want everything. They literally want you to send your passport. I mean, maybe that's a slight exaggeration for anyone from PayPal, but the quantity of information I had to, and the quality of information I had to send to PayPal for them to change, was even harder than the bank. The bank I could just go in the branch and sort it. It was really challenging. And sorry for PayPal.
We need to break down.
Yeah.
We definitely need to break down these systems that no longer work for us. Melanie, are there moments or milestones that stand out to you, particularly that are significant to you, that key milestones in your journey where you've had that moment of you now feel truly yourself?
Yeah. I was going to say, there are times where I just felt like I'd bitten off more than I could chew. And definitely my faith and, my perseverance had to keep me going. Feeling like an imposter was huge to me. So, sort of, I'll give you an example. I was really concerned for a lot of times that I would be challenged in a bathroom, and or a changing room. The anti-trans movement, as over the time of my sort of time, has grown and grown and grown, and the fear was real. And something that I never anticipated was when I'd had the gender affirming surgery, I suddenly didn't feel like an imposter. I remember coming home from my surgery from Brighton, and normally, if I went into a service station, a motorway service station bathroom, and there was a lot of young people in there, nothing against young people, but just if there was a lot of young people there, I would feel really anxious, and I would either not go to the bathroom, or I would be real as quick as possible, because I would just feel really self-aware. And suddenly, I had no makeup on. I was really poorly. I looked a state, and I needed to pee. And I went in the bathroom, and I could hear all the people outside, but I didn't feel scared. I felt like I belonged. I felt like I had a right to be there. And that was something that I never expected. And I guess, yeah, that was the start. And I guess that helped me, sort of the gender affirming surgery certainly helped me when I wanted to get involved in sport, because I was so scared when I was doing sport that, where would I change? Overthinking things often, how would I swim? I used to be a swimmer. I used to swim every week, and I just haven't swam the same since transitioning, just because, the fear of going to the swimming pool and what that looks like, and it's really hard to stay fit when you've got all these problems and challenges. Sort of finding my community and through my fitness family, and just I was in a spin class, and I'll never forget the instructor, and he said, "Get comfortable with being uncomfortable." And you know what? That stuck with me. That became my motto. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. He meant it from a fitness place, but you know what? It challenged me. I left my job of 16 years and started a new role. It was scary, it was risky, but it was a time to start afresh. Nobody knew me, and it was the most empowering thing I'd ever done. I've fallen back in love with technology. I've just, it's just allowed me to grow and feel so much more confident. My relationships with people have changed. I feel valued, and that is huge. And it's allowed me to then start, getting involved more. It's that get comfortable with being uncomfortable has been a motto that's kind of really challenged me when I'm wanting just to sit back, like when you rang me the other day and said, "Can you cover this?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't really want to talk about." Do you know what? Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Get up there, Mel, and do it. Somebody wants to hear this and needs to hear this.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm actually a very strong believer on that quote of getting comfortable to become uncomfortable. But in times like this, Melanie, who adapts? Who flexes? Where does the responsibility sit? It is not just your responsibility to become uncomfortable. I think we all have a responsibility. It sits with everyone. I'm just going to go back to the chat box here. I've just got a comment from Ben Bradshaw. Says, going back to the piece around the names, I think it's easier than companies let on. If an inclusive mindset was taken from the initial point of building the HR systems, it would be easier. So how do we ensure that systems and processes have equity built into from the very, very outset. Yes, of course, we've got historical systems that are still in our places of work, but these new systems that are now coming into our organizations, how do we ensure that the technology has equity built into, you know, every single process? And I think there's a huge gap there that we need to find and close. I've got a question here from not quite sure who it's from. Let's just see if I can find who that question is from. Alicia Gregory. She says, how can, bear with me, I've lost that question for some reason. My chat box has just gone and disappeared. I don't know why that's happened, but I'll go back to that chat box in a moment. Looking ahead, Melanie, what are your aspirations, hopes, dreams of building a trans-inclusive world where our trans siblings feel safe, they're valued, they're respected, they're accepted, they're welcomed and celebrated for who they are?
Interestingly, when you sent me this question, I was a bit perplexed with it. You know, I was starting to think back, and you know, I think I hope for a world where every person, no matter of their gender, is celebrated for who they are. But we're still facing the same challenges. You know, we were debating 12 years ago. The same conversations about bathrooms, safe spaces, trans validity, and trans children are just the same as we've been arguing for the last 12 years. You know, it hasn't changed. And I think, you know, we just need to all become a bit more sensitive about our words and our actions. You know, maybe some kind of staff training would be something really good. You know, how to be respectful when dealing with customers and services. I'll give you an example of this. I was traveling, coming back from a ski holiday, and I was going through a French airport. And it could have been any airport, but it just happened to be in France. And you come up to the security and you queue up and you put all your laptop and your stuff and your rings and everything on the conveyor belt. And then you go through the square thing and it bleeps. And suddenly there is a debate between the man and the woman on the opposite side. And they're debating my gender. There's a huge queue behind me. The airport is packed. It's open out and they are debating my gender. And he's saying male, she's saying female. And they're having this argument. And I'm sort of there, well, where am I going? I want to be patted down by a woman. And I just felt so embarrassed. And I could feel my face going flushed. And I was just so... And eventually the supervisor came over and was good enough to at least pull me out the queue and take me over to the side and asked to see my passport. And, you know, once she saw my passport and it said female on my passport, she was quite happy then to allow me to be patted down by the woman and then move on. They could have been so much more sensitive about that. I just wanted the ground to swallow me whole, you know. It just felt, you know, I just felt ugly. I just felt out of place. I don't know. It was horrible. If you can kind of understand what that felt like, you know, I'm sure, you know, that was a minor thing. You know, people in wheelchairs and things. My dad used to have awful problems getting through security. Just being sensitive, you know, taking, if it's just brought, if okay, that was a problem, just take you to the one side. Let's do that quietly. Let's do it in front of everybody else. You know, let's have that conversation somewhere, you know, in a quiet place. Just being aware of the impact of your words and your actions on that person. Little things, you know, if you want to talk to someone about, you know, something about, you know, something personal, take them out of the office. Don't do it in front of everybody else. Don't do it where people can hear. Just, you know, that and that relates to anything, not just this subject, but literally anything. Just bit of forethought. Go into a side room, can have a chat. Not, you know, and then, you know, we kind of go back over it again. Misgendering is so painful. You know, the amount of times where I've been having a great day, you know, I bought something that I really liked. I felt really good about it. You know, you go to pay and they say, thank you, sir. And you say, what? No, I'm in a dress. God's sake, where did that come from? Do you know what I mean? Like, do I look that bad? You know what I mean? You start questioning yourself, and your mood can suddenly go from being on top of the world to being rock bottom. And those emotions can change so much, and it doesn't matter. You can say yes, okay, I'm sorry, whatever, move on. It was an accident, but it still has an impact on that person. So try to just be respectful beforehand, because you can't undo it
Yes,
once.
of course. Yeah, yes, of course we go through a lot of self-doubt, don't we, as individuals? But the piece around awareness, yes, of course we need awareness, but in order to build the awareness, we need education. And
Yes.
so this brings me nicely on to the next question that we've just had in by Dylan Schumann says, thank you so much for sharing so openly, Melanie. How do you believe businesses can partner with trans communities to combat these waves of anti-trans legislation we're witnessing both here in the UK as well as the USA?
It's interesting. I definitely think it's an area that needs sensitivity. I think, one, we need strong and fair leadership, ideally from government.
Mm,
We need to bring unity and safety for everyone. And just getting people around the table without the fear. There is a massive fear that if somebody says something that doesn't sit right, then you're transphobic or you're homophobic. We need to stop being so sensitive in that manner, just to have that conversation, creating a safe space where people can have that conversation to talk about these things. Some of the challenges, there needs to be movement on both sides.
I
I think,
mean, in terms
yeah,
of leadership, yes, of course, we can go and speak to our leadership and create that ripple effect that can
yeah,
create those great waves. But unfortunately, where we are with the UK government at the moment, who have just announced DE&I is wasting money at the moment. I'm not sure if we are in a position to influence government, but if there is anyone here today that has any ideas on how we can respond to the UK government on what they have announced, I would very, very be interested in having a chat with you. Drop me an email or a LinkedIn message. Please do reach out to me.
but it takes
Melanie,
leadership
final.
from government. I mean, it takes leadership at all levels.
Of course,
We're all
absolutely.
responsible for our own businesses, our own communities. We have more responsibility than you know. One of the things about developing your personal network is actually, yes, you can't influence certain things, but you have a sphere of influence around you. Every person has a sphere of influence. If you're making the right motions in your sphere of influence, it has a knock-on ripple effect.
One final thought as we close out, Melanie.
Well,
Anything that you would like to leave the delegates with, a thought or a challenge, anything on top of mind today?
Well, obviously, I've said that, recognize that every person is unique and every journey is unique,
Mm,
and life is challenging, no matter what's your background. So be respectful, be kind, empower each other, as you mentioned earlier. Everyone's carrying a burden. Don't make it heavier. And one of my favorite mottos from Pat Bennett's chorus, taken from Micro 6, is act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly.
really like that. Really like that. Melanie, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure
Thank
to have
you.
spent the last 45 minutes with you. And you and I will continue our conversations for days and weeks and months to come. But I would just like to leave this session by saying, continue living and working and doing what you're doing, led by your values that you have, embedded so strongly within your every moments of every single day. And I think if we can all learn that from you today, we can all be more richer in how we live and work and respect one another as well.
Thank you. Yes.
Melanie, thank you. It's been an honor.
Thank you for listening.